Hello and welcome to another bottom shelf gaming review. As you can see, I've got on the right attire to be reviewing this motorcycle themed game this week. Guys, lately I've been playing a lot of games to write about and film in real life videos on. I just finished this game by the name of Days Gone, and I couldn't not talk about it. This game struck me as ripe for the picking because it was the most difficult game for me to get a read on and to score at the end of the day. I went from liking it to not liking it within the same 10-minute period at times, and by the finish I was left with a whole lot to unpack. So this is going to be my chance to do that, you know? Not all of that I'm unpacking is going to be good. In fact, a good amount, not so good. With that in mind, we're going to head on over to the graphics.
Deadly force is authorized.
Now, a word that's going to crop up a lot in this review is inconsistency. While the overall graphics are in keeping with a game released in 2019, which this was, I find many individual aspects very easy to pick on. Despite being set in Oregon, which is one of the lushest and greenest of the West Coast states, this game subscribes to the color palette of early 2007 Xbox 360, with various muddy browns, grays, and decidedly unlush greens occupying the vast majority of the color scheme. The world has essentially been untouched by people over the last 2 years, and while games like The Last of Us show how the lack of human presence can create its own kind of beauty within nature's reclamation of the world, Days Gone posits that everything will somehow look worse. At times you'll be granted a nice vista or two, but it in no way captures the actual beauty that is those actual vistas in Oregon. That said, the effects while riding your bike through the muddy areas and the weather system and effects are really quite stunningly done. There is some good work here. It's just the color palette lets it down a little bit. Everything looks a bit too flat. There's nothing really popping off the screen visually. I will say, though, the faces and animations are probably the best the game gets as far as graphics go. If anything, these faces are at times too expressive, a la L.A. Noir's over-the-top facial cues. But while these instances of the uncanny valley are occasionally present, they are very brief and overall not to the game's detriment. I'd say they're few and far between. What is to the game's detriment, however, are the large number of graphical glitches that I experience while playing this game. There are times where there's an excessively large number of freaks on screen at a time, and in order to load in these instances, some of the landscapes suffer. Almost comically, you'll know when you're nearing a high population area based on how much the trees or the ground around you hasn't loaded in. This is standard fare for last gen, but when you have games like God of War and Red Dead 2, this feels much less acceptable, and it happened enough for it to be a very large problem for a AAA game. There was one quest where I had to wait for a large horde to attack me in a cave, but because the entrance to the cave and the bridge outside hadn't rendered properly, the horde never came, and I had to reload a save more than 20 minutes prior. I then retried the mission on this save, and it happened again. Eventually I was able to move forth in the game by not focusing on that area and coming back later when I was sure it had loaded by checking out the bridge before I went to start the mission. I was able to move forward, but I had a more sour taste in my mouth after that. I'd say overall the game looks good, occasionally even great, but the color palette and the many bugs are going to leave you, much like Rowan Atkinson when asked if he should have done one more sequel with his most beloved character, pondering about what could have been. The graphics score a 13 out of 20.
Do it.
With that, we're going to move on to sound.
John, where did you serve before the shit went down? You know what an MRE looks like? You know how to recon an enemy position? You know...
Now remember how I said everything in this game is inconsistent? This is probably most present in this category, as everything Days Gone does right with sound, it also does something wrong to counter it. And we'll start with the voices. We'll start with the good, because here we have a really talented voice cast, including practiced voice actor and mocap star Sam Witwer as our lead Deacon St. John, He does a great job here as a very damaged and questionably sane lead character who not only makes poor decisions but then doubles down on these poor decisions to make even worse ones. You never feel that Deacon is fully in control as he talks to himself, changes intonation on the fly, he goes from speaking calmly to wildly yelling his lines to his passengers. The direction is a little strange and not always fitting, as these inconsistencies in his speech where he goes from talking at a normal volume to then yelling or yelling at a radio broadcast don't really exist in the more scripted and heavily directed cutscenes. I think if they wanted to underline that and show that Deacon's responses are due to his mindset after 2 years living out in the shit, they could have shown that a little bit in the cutscenes as well, because to me it kind of seems like they just poorly directed Sam Witwer sometimes to deliver these lines. You'll go from sneaking by a horde as a radio broadcast finishes, purposefully not gunning your engine so that you can get past the freakers without alerting them, and Deacon will yell out his thoughts on the radio broadcast, just full volume to the world. And it doesn't attract the freakers, but it does take you out of the experience.
Right, Cope, so you and your granddaddy set traps for him, and you and your old man used to lay down salt licks. That's real sporting.
At other times, the voice lines won't stop triggering, and Deacon will just keep on talking shit like he's killing people over and over again when nothing is actually happening on screen. Here's a sample of that. It's kind of funny.
Let's see what you boys have been up to. Oh yeah, here's a little chaos for you. You thought you'd just ride down a girl, tear that shit up, yeah? Fucking anarchist. How do you like that? How's this for a little energy, huh?
But overall, there's good work here, though. I feel the emotion coming through, and the conflict shine especially when Deacon is confronted with an old enemy from his past. The hate comes through in spades, and their heated conflict was a highlight of the piece for me. You get that these guys hate each other. Later in the game, there's a colonel who obviously isn't holding up well in this new world, and as you get to know more about him, he begins to sound less and less of a friendly, like, father figure, almost, and more ominous, and that is some truly brilliant voice acting and story work. Overall, I'd say very solid work for every character involved in the story, even the ones that are only in it briefly. Not quite as good are the effects sounds, which are pretty bog standard. It's disappointing because none of the guns sound especially punchy or satisfying to shoot. The shotguns, I would say, are especially disappointing, and they sound more like a handgun blast rather than this chunky death machine, which you're supposed to buy that they are. Sound lends a lot to impact, and the combat suffers because of the lack of more satisfying sound work. The music is another place where this game is lacking mojo. You get in some very large-scale fights here where you're fighting for your life, and you'd expect something with a lot more bass and power to blare in the background, adding to the tension. It's barely even present. The game does try to add some licensed music into some of the story bits where you're driving for a long distance, a la Red Dead. Red Dead does that as well, but they don't quite work as well because of the lack of presence that music has had in this game to this point. I think even having a couple of radio stations, or having the guy who drones into the radio occasionally put on some music, maybe, because you are going around with a radio. It just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity as far as sound goes. I'd say overall the sound would be below average, if not saved by the at times excellent voice work, so sound as a whole gets a somewhat unfortunate 12 out of 20.
Here, cut!
Move around him. Come on.
And with that score, we get to the gameplay. And have I said inconsistency enough yet? You can tell me if I'm going on too much. I'm not going to change anything, because I can't at this point, but you can tell me. Anyways, we're going to start with the combat here, and oh boy, is it average. Like the C student who used to cheat off your papers and then ridicule you for getting them an even worse score, Days Gone tries to capture the weight of other games' superior combat and fails to do so. The melee combat is a mess of spamming attack and rolling in an awkward semicircle when an enemy manages to dodge. It's so awkward and silly looking that it takes you out of the game. You do like a full roll in order to dodge instead of a duck or sidestep out of the way. And I gotta say that the melee outside of the improvised weapons that you can pick up and craft is so weak. I know it's supposed to be, but in the early game you're gonna be slashing and rolling for a good minute before you drop even one of the freaks, which makes some of these gameplay segments where you don't have much stamina and you're not able to run away very well pretty much a huge drag. The shooting is fine at best, but the accuracy of your guns and ability to finally aim is pushed to the limits whenever the freakers get close, which they will quite a lot. You'll have a headshot lined up, but Deacon will just be aiming past them as the reticule can't think as fast as the freak, and it can't quite keep up with what you want it to do. This happens constantly, as it is a fast zombie game. Think Left 4 Dead rather than The Last of Us when it comes to the weight and speed of gunplay. The issues lie in the execution, however, and while Left 4 Dead has you running from location to location, improvising and developing choke points with escape routes, Days Gone rarely manages to capture the kind of thrill that comes with the best of games in this genre. The human-on-human fighting is bland and uninteresting at best, and is made incredibly simple with the focus skill which lets you slow down time for easy headshots. You don't have to think on your feet too much against the dumb AI, you don't really have to set up traps against them, and they do go down from melee faster than the freaks as well. I'd say this would be fine if it took more of a backseat to the more exciting freaker encounters. Unfortunately, the moments where the game does thrive, in which you take on these unbelievably massive hordes, and they are huge. This may be the most enemies I've seen on screen chasing after me at once, in a AAA title at least, where things look good. And the frame rate stays pretty solid. It moves well. But anyways, the moments where the game does thrive and where it lets you take on these unbelievably massive hordes through planning and whittling down numbers with just sheer ammunition and improvising on the spot, they're introduced just too late in the game, and they are too few and far between. These occasions as well, while quite good, could also be improved with a better run and gun feature or improved, less awkward animations to help make the gameplay feel more fun and fluid, as well as tense, without the annoying frustrations that serve to slow you down in the heat of the fight. Now, the first gameplay that they showed of this game at E3 made it look like it was more of like a parkour-based game. They showed the most exciting bit of the game, the lumberyard, where you have to take down just a ton of enemies. And that is truly the best part of the game. They showed off the best that the game had to offer. So if you don't think that that E3 trailer is at all interesting to you, then this game isn't going to be very interesting to you. Next up is the driving. There's some cool stuff here. And there's also some not so cool stuff. You start the game with a fresh bike, unupgraded, because yours has just been scrapped and it's slow and bulky and feels like it's held together with flex tape and silly putty. As you progress, you'll upgrade and notice that you start moving a little faster, drifting a bit more precisely, and get a little nitro boost. My issues are that these upgrades don't really feel all that different. If you went from driving a fully upgraded bike to removing all of the upgrades and trying it out, you'll see the difference, but unless you do that, you're going to notice some slight improvements at the best of times. I kept waiting to get the upgrade that was going to make that sense of speed kick in, but towards the end of the game, I had maxed out most of the stats for the bike, and the nitrous in my regular speed still just felt like it was around the same as it was towards the beginning of the game. It feels like you constantly have those brakes on, and you're slowing down so that the game can catch up to you, and that's unfortunate for a game where so much of it is spent driving from place to place with your motorcycle. The bike combat, as well, is nothing to write home about, but I did find chasing after enemies to be somewhat entertaining. I wish you could go a little faster, of course, but the explosion of ragdoll physics that usually accompany a victory when you get that takedown after chasing down a bike is pretty satisfying. It's not so bad. And I would say that overall, riding the bike around Oregon, dodging freakers and human enemies and all that kind of stuff was always somewhat entertaining. It does have really good weather effects where you're going to drift more and kick up more mud when there's rain. It determines your speed and drift potential, but I'd say it's overall not quite good enough to make me want to explore the world outside of the occasional collectible. It just would have felt a whole lot better if the speed wasn't so limited, and I gotta say that this is likely because of rendering and poppin' issues, which this game has plenty of. And now, we're going to move to the things to do, the activities, and general gameplay section. And this is where the game truly suffers, in my mind. The inconsistency, there you go, another one, in quality of these missions is out of this world. There are so many shortened quests where you have to follow someone, and these are reminiscent of the least interesting bits in bigger and better games like Uncharted, where you have to walk slowly having a conversation and then lift like a log or something to squeeze through. There's some quests here where there's just too much of that. It's almost like the missions are based around these moments with bits of combat and actual gameplay kind of sparsely intertwined with them. There are even times where you know where you're going to have to go next. You know you're going to have to lift this log or boost someone up to go in through a window, but you have to wait for the character that you're doing the mission with to slowly walk over there and figure that out for themselves. And I gotta say, I, as the player, felt 2 steps ahead of the game most of the time, and that I'm not being rewarded for thinking ahead and figuring it out before the game does, or before the character does that I'm on the mission with. There's also frequent stealth segments, which consist of, and please stop me if you've heard this before, hiding in tall grass to avoid being seen, and throwing rocks to distract others and move around them. These segments are boring and uninspired at best, and painfully frustrating at worst. This is truly an awful bit of the game, and you'll wish it was just cut completely by the end of your first stealth section. Just cut this, put in more of the freaker battles, and you've got me. Unfortunately, there will be plenty of these to come, because there's probably about 6 or 7 stealth segments throughout the game that are necessary to complete it. Oh boy. The more structured quests where you have to clear an area with a companion or alone are quite good for the most part, but like I mentioned earlier, the real bread and butter are the missions with lots and lots of freaks. These horde missions are introduced way too late in the game, but they are the definitive highlight of this game, and if they made a sequel just focusing more on these missions with some of the other stuff intertwined to give you a bit of a cooldown in front of these, or in between these very tense moments, I would be so on board. Setting up proximity and remote bombs near gas pumps and hucking napalm into arriving massive bodies is entertaining as all hell, and I simply wish they had just introduced these earlier. When I wasn't checked out by the other less than stellar components of the game. There are just some gameplay annoyances as well that crop up consistently to mar the experience further as well. I'm just going to rattle off some of them in a row here. Square is used to pick things up and interact with characters, but more often than not, Deacon will circle around something or walk away from it when you try to use it by holding square. It's just a little annoying. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but man, it happens like all the time. The game also handles missions with you receiving calls on your radio to check in with an outpost. On countless occasions, you'll leave an outpost only to get a radio call from someone that you just left at that outpost to head back there for a mission. So you leave out the front door, within 30 seconds they tell you to come back in, so you turn around and come back, get the mission, and then you're leaving again, and then maybe you'll get another radio call. You never know. It does happen. In this specific occasion that I have playing in the background here, an encounter spawned feet behind me as I turned around to go to the outpost for the mission that I just got from the radio call to head back to the outpost that should have triggered by me just being there in the first place. Very annoying. Another feature of the game is that you have this Batman-like detective mode to track people down, but Deacon St. John has a sort of clairvoyance where he can see very specifically exactly what happened to someone, who it was, and who took them at some points. It's very strange. I don't know how Deacon got these powers, but he has them.
Oh my god, is that Anderson, Leather Dragon? Well, how the hell am I gonna get my bounty?
Herb collection is back and worse than ever. Think Horizon Zero Dawn, where you have to like run around and pick up a bunch of herbs to craft things. It's less prevalent here, but it's still a necessity to craft a lot of the items in the game. And it's so much worse because you have to ride your motorcycle to a location, pick up something. You might be attacked by a freak as you're picking the herb, and it takes a little too long. Games like Skyrim or Oblivion, basically like the Bethesda type games where you just press X on something and you pick it up immediately, that would have worked a lot better here, I think, because you already have to get off the bike and it's already slow enough. Everything just takes a little bit longer with the bike, and it slows down already boring game mechanics that nobody likes in the first place. It just makes them a little worse. Friendly AI is worse than the enemy AI, and they will often make strange decisions or just stop helping you mid-fight, which is always great. The upgrade system is the last thing I'm going to touch on here. And it's not bad, with each level bringing a sizable difference in your gameplay experience. I will say the Survivor skill tree has the most useful stuff. And when it comes to increasing your stats, you have HP, stamina, and focus. There is no reason to dump anything into HP and focus. Stamina is far and away the most valuable stat in this game. You needed to run away from basically every enemy that you're going to be working with, and a lot of things consume stamina. So I don't see why anyone would not put a bunch of points into stamina early on, or why the upgrades aren't a little more significant when it came to the stamina stat, because I maxed it out very quickly and then started kind of touching on HP and focus, but I didn't really need them as much as I needed that stamina at all. Alrighty then. Sorry guys, there's just a lot to unpack on this one. Sorry for the ranting, but this game tested my patience on more than one occasion, with 3 game crashes on top of the other bugs and issues that I had with it. And for all these reasons and more, I just have to give the combat and driving a 10 out of 20, and the activities and missions an 11 out of 20. And the activities and missions would be much, much lower if it weren't for those saving graces with the Freaker missions. Those ones really saved the day here. So we're going to finish off the review with the story.
Torn apart, eaten alive.
Guess he's gonna find out.
Fuck you. Goodbye, Leon.
No, wait. All right, no.
So what are you doing out here?
What am I doing, Dick? Addie told me to come and get you.
And here it's a bit of an odd duck, because my history with motorcycle gang themed stories is not good. It is maybe one of my least favorite focal points of all time. I really can't stand Sons of Anarchy. I think Lost in the Damned is the worst GTA expansion. I also have considerable zombie game fatigue because there's just been so many of them. And so my hopes weren't super high for this. But this is the category that Days Gone surprised me in. Deacon may have started out a little rough around the edges, but I grew to care about him and his relationships, at least somewhat, over the course of my 40-hour playthrough. Boozer, who's Deacon's best friend and only true ally in the early sections of the game, stupid name, but alright character. He portrays a kind of powder keg, just from something that happens to him early in the game. He turns into this just wired powder keg, just on the verge of exploding into something truly terrible. And he does have enough reason for his actions, so you get behind him a little bit. Some of the characters you meet in the second half of the game are actually spectacular, and I loved the way that the game introduced villains. It lets you get to know them first and understand their thoughts and motivations before giving you reasons to truly despise them and root against them. And that's where the success in this story comes from. I hated some of these characters, and it's not due to bad writing or just that the character was made poorly. It's actually a good character, but I hate them because of their actions and their decisions that they make in the game. There are some strange bits that I couldn't fully get behind, like strange decisions that a few of the characters make, like letting an unsubtle warmonger head a peace talk. No shit, this actually happens. Other than that, the characters all feel very real. And characters use humor as well to deflect from what they might be feeling or thinking, and some of the jokes and the reactions are actually very entertaining and even quite funny. I chuckled in this game. It doesn't normally happen when I'm playing video games, especially when something is trying for a bit of comedy. The way these characters also speak to one another feels natural, with hems and haws and ums and repeating the same word. Basically, it sounds like normal talking, normal dialogue between two people. It's kind of taken straight out of like a mumblecore indie film. And that's fantastic. I mean, it tries something different here, which is more than I could say for a good portion of the actual gameplay. What I also like here are the themes. This is a game that puts forth that surviving isn't living as its foremost philosophy. When you save someone's life and end up sending them to a work camp, essentially, that's not the end of their story if you haven't given them something to live for. And the way you save your friends' lives by renewing their purpose or giving them something to care about, and the way that Deacon begins learning to feel again himself, is something I'm not going to forget despite the game's stumbles. It's because of the characters and the writing that I kept pushing myself through this game despite it feeling like a slog at times, and I've come out the other side entertained and in some ways impressed by this imperfect, messy, but altogether kind of good game. I do have to hedge here a bit. It's not the best story in the world, but it is very surprising when compared with the subject matter of the motorcycle club slash end of the world. It seems a little bit cheesy and like it's not going to work, and it works a lot better than you'd think. And so the story in the end is going to get a 16 out of 20. So, that's my review of Days Gone. Probably the hardest I've ever had to think on a game to decide whether I liked it or not. So I hope you appreciate the amount of thought and effort that I put into this. In the end, it is a worthwhile time, I've decided, but certainly not for everyone. My final score for the game ends up being a 63% out of 100. For me, 50 is average, so this game is rated above average, but it's definitely not for everybody. I myself would not choose to replay this game again, and I would not recommend it to most of my friends, but the few that I would, I think they might just find something a little bit special among all the blood and brains. So guys, please do give a like and subscribe if you would. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, hit the unlike. I'd rather you be honest. And let me know what I did wrong. If I did do something wrong, let me know what you liked about the review. My next video is going to be another in real life video, which I know some of you have been waiting for since that Stardew Valley one. So please do check that out to find out just what game it's going to be. Leave comments here on what you want me to review or parody coming up, and stay subscribed to get your soon-to-be weekly bit of video game comedy fix. I will also be streaming on my Bottom Shelf Gamer account on Twitch. The link is in the description for that Twitch account. A little game I can't wait to check out by the name of Disco Elysium. It was my most anticipated game of last year, so I'm pretty excited about that. Just haven't got around to playing it yet. And that is going to be this Friday the 13th, November 13th, 2020, at 7 p.m. So be there to check that out if you have any interest in watching a playthrough of that game. And with that, we here at BSG, which does stand for Bottom Shelf Gaming and not Battlestar Galactica, we love you, we praise you, and we will see you next time on the Bottom Shelf.